National Nancy's, the fourth in the Alex Reynolds Mysteries. Author Fred Hunter, St. Martin's Press, New York, 2000. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 12. It was after 7 when we got home, and Mother was gone for the evening. Peter and I threw together some leftovers for dinner, and after finishing them off and cleaning up, we were just about to settle in to watch a movie when the phone rang. I reached over and grabbed the receiver from the phone on the end table by the couch. Hello? Alex? Nelson? Larry? I wasn't expecting to hear back from you today. Oh, by the way, thanks for not telling Mother that I'd called you when you talked to her. You asked me to keep it confidential. His tone implied that there was never a question as to whether or not he would keep his word. Oh, what's going on? I asked. Alex, you asked me to check out a person named Simon Tivoli. Are you sure he lives in London? Yes, I said, my heart speeding up. What's wrong? Peter shut off the television set and sat looking at me with concern. I've been in contact with my British counterpart. He's checked for me and found nobody by that name living in London. I could feel myself trying not to panic. Well, there could be any number of reasons for that. He could have just recently moved there, or maybe he lives in a suburb. My contact did all of the necessary checking, Nelson said, with that same eerie lack of emotion. But, I sputtered. That's not all. You say he told you he works for a company named Cyberdyne? Yes. That's another thing. There's no business by that name operating in England. What? I said bolt upright. What is it? What's wrong? Peter asked. Are you sure? I said into the phone. The name sounds so familiar. I'm positive I've heard of it before. We're quite sure. Neither in England nor here. My mind reeled. We had narrowed our investigation down to a search for a tape that Jody had been trying to get when she was killed, culminating in the information we'd just gleaned that pointed the finger at John Schuler. All the while, Peter had dismissed my suspicion about Simon as paranoid fantasies. In fact, inwardly, I had done that too, and now here I was being told that my suspicions of Simon were justified. Mother was dating an imposter. Nelson called me back to the present. Now, there is the possibility that we're not coming up with his name for some perfectly innocent reason, or perhaps you misunderstood the name of his company. But Alex, I think you know what this means. Confidentiality aside, I have to turn this matter over to the agents on the Clark bombing. No! Alex, this man came onto the scene just before the office of a political candidate was bombed. He connected himself to you in a way that gave him access to that office. It may be entirely innocent, but under the circumstances, it doesn't look very good. But he's still here, I said. Would he stay here after bombing the place? Possibly, if he didn't get his target. But why the attempt on Peter and me? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, if Simon is some sort of hitman, then he'd be here to kill Charlie Clark, wouldn't he? It didn't escape me that I was now arguing the opposite side of my former position. Again, possibly it's also possible that the office was the target, and the purpose was to frighten Clark out of the race. My mind flew back to what Simon had said at the party, that if he were Clark, he would have dropped out after the bombing. Even at the time, it had sounded to me like a veiled threat that he'd hoped we would pass on to Clark. But that was another thing that I'd written off as paranoia. But something still bothered me. And then the attempt on us still doesn't make any sense. Alex, you're missing the point. Whatever his motives, he's traveling this country under an assumed name and was in the area during a political bombing. That has to be investigated. And since you've been removed from the case, it's not your problem. The hell it's not, I exclaimed. This guy is out with my mother right now. There was a beat, then Nelson replied, all the more reason that this should be put on the proper hands as soon as possible. We need to turn this over to the FBI. No, wait, I said quickly. Please, let me look into it first. I can't do that. This involves my mother, and I want to make sure we're on the right track before it goes to Agent Henry. Alex, If Tivoli's involved in this, we can't afford to give him the opportunity to get away. The office was bombed a week ago, and he's still here. Your car was bombed last night, Nelson countered. And he's still here. Obviously, he's not in any hurry to go anywhere. Please, Nelson, if Mother is linked to a suspect, she'll get dragged through the mud publicly. I want to make sure he really is a suspect before that happens. I was counting on the prospect that our emotionless superior had at least to some extent fallen under my mother's spell. After the longest pause yet, he said, I can't hold off forever. Give us 24 hours. We'll see if we can find out anything definite. I could sense that he was about to turn me down, so I quickly added, Come on, Nelson, 24 hours. What could happen in 24 hours? He emitted a slight, but had the decency not to point that out, that I'd caused much more trouble than this in much less time. In the end, he relented, albeit reticently. Throughout my conversation with Nelson, Peter had continued to ask what was wrong with increasing anxiety. When I finally hung up the phone, I explained it to him. You're kidding, he exclaimed once I was finished. I wish I was. But I still think that's crazy, said Peter. Why go to all the trouble to get to know Gene and everything just to blow up a building? It's just not possible, I said, shaking my head. I don't believe it. I thought he was your favorite suspect. That was before I knew how suspicious he really was, I said, then added with great reluctance. And that was only jealousy, and you know it. And Nelson said there was no Cyberdyne company? No, and I really don't get that because it sounds so familiar. To me, too. Why would he give us the name of a company when that's so easy to check? I don't know. You were questioning him as if you were suspicious of him. Maybe he felt cornered into coming up with a name. Cyberdyne. 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 I repeated aloud, pounding my fist limply into the seat cushion beside me as I tried to remember. Why does that sound so... Then it came to me. I dropped my head into my hands. Ah, Christ! Cyberdyne! What is it? We don't deserve to be called movie buffs. What? I turned to him. Cyberdyne. That's the name of the evil corporation in the Terminator movies. He went a bit pale. Oh, Alex, that's nuts. Why would he use the name of a company we might recognize? Who the hell knows, I said. Maybe he was toying with us. Maybe he's been toying with Mother. Maybe he's the type of person who likes to do that when he's going to blow things up, like Jeremy Irons in that Die Hard movie. We've got to tell your mother, Peter said. I jumped up from the couch. We've got to do more than that. Come on. Where are we going? He asked as he got up. To the River Edge Motel, I replied, heading for the door. That's where he said he's staying, isn't it? Alex, we can't. We have to. We can at least check it out. We've got to find out what this guy's up to. When Peter still hesitated, I added, Besides, we haven't burgled anything in a long, long time. It'll be fun. I ran upstairs to grab a couple of things I thought we might need, and then checked the phone book for the address of the motel. I let out an audible gasp when I saw it. What's the matter now? Peter asked. The River Edge Motel is at 600 South Mercy. So? That's just south of the Loop, Peter. Remember what Henry told us? The call that we got about the tape came from a payphone just south of the Loop. Oh, God, he said. As the name would imply, the River Edge Motel was situated on the bank of the Chicago River. It was a 2-story rectangular cracker box with a balcony providing access to the second level. All of the windows overlooked the river, which might have been romantic had not that particular area of the water looked so much like a sewage canal. As we emerged from the cab, whose driver had only reluctantly driven us to that address, I said, My God, an outhouse with a view. I can't believe Mother's beloved Simon is staying in this dump. You would think a hitman could afford a better hideout. Maybe he's trying to keep a low profile, said Peter as the cab drove away. From the look on his face, he was having difficulty picturing Simon there, too. We don't know what room he's staying in. How are we going to find it? I shrugged. The easy way. We'll ask. The motel's office extended off the far end of the building, like a pus-swollen blister, A mountainous man in a faded red plaid shirt and blue jeans that could barely contain him was perched on a stool behind the desk. His dull eyes were glued to a tiny black and white television that had a bent coat hanger for an antenna. He didn't look up when we came through the door, despite the incongruous Avon calling doorbell that rang out to announce us. We went up to the counter and I cleared my throat. Yeah, the mound of flesh said without taking his eyes off the set. The picture was so fuzzy, I couldn't tell what he was watching. We're here to see Simon Tivoli. So? He was so abrupt and disinterested that despite the fact that we didn't particularly want to attract his attention, I was tempted to grab the front of his shirt and shake him to get his attention. However, with his layers of fat, I had a feeling it would take too long for the ripples to get to his core. And besides, there was an aroma. Something resembling burned beans emanating from him. I wouldn't have touched him with a pair of sterilized tongs. We don't know what room he's in, I said evenly. 11, second floor. I thanked him with an ironic perkiness that I'm sure was lost on him, and Peter and I left the office. As we went up the stairs to the second level, Peter said, "Have you given any thought to how we're going to break into this place?" "Yeah. Here." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the contents, and showed them to him. He stared down at my hand incredulously. "Bobby pins." I nodded. "To pick the lock." "They always use a bit of stiff wire to do it in the movies. I got them from Mother's room." I didn't know she had bobby pins. And I brought a nail file. I don't know why, but it seems like a good thing to have. "You actually think we'll be able to pick the lock?" "Look at this place. I can't imagine it being very hard to get in." The right edge of his lip curled. "I can't imagine anybody wanting to get into this place." The only sign of life on the second level was the room at the end of the balcony. A table lamp illuminated the badly stained curtains, which were drawn against prying eyes. From inside, a recording of the Carpenters crooning "Top of the World" was blaring at top volume, as if the occupant had mistaken them for a heavy metal band. Room number 11 was the next to the last room. We could tell it was the right place only because of the barely visible shadows of the numbers that had once been nailed to the door. "Should we knock first?" Peter said quietly. "I don't see why. There's no light on, and we know he's out with Mother." He pointed at the doorknob. "Look, there's a lock there, but no deadbolt." "Isn't that against the law?" I said. He put his hands on his hip. "When we're done breaking and entering, do you want to turn them in?" "Oh, shut up," I said, lightly thumping his shoulder. I crouched down in front of the door and scrutinized the keyhole. So how do we do this?" "Wait a minute. Why don't you try a credit card?" I looked up at him. "What?" "A credit card. Sometimes you can run a piece of plastic in there and slip the lock open." He paused to smile. "Like in the movies." I smiled back. "Are you making fun of me?" "Whatever you're going to do, would you do it fast? We're not exactly hidden here." "I don't think the rats will call the police," I said. I pulled my wallet out of my back pocket and extracted my Visa. With one hand on the doorknob, I slid the card in between the door and the jamb. When the card was about halfway in, it struck something and would go no further. I moved it up and down, then flexed it back and forth, but the lock refused to pop. With one last effort, I bent the card outward and pushed at the same time, hoping this would wedge it through the catch. The result? My Visa snapped in half. "Oh, great," I said, falling from my crouch to a sitting position. I tried to pull the card out using the half that was dangling from the door, but it peeled off, leaving the other half behind with only one jagged edge exposed. "How the hell am I going to get that out?" "Didn't you bring a pair of tweezers?" said Peter. I pursed my lips at him. "You're not helping." I gripped the corner of the now defunct credit card between my thumb and forefinger, pressed as hard as I could, and pulled. After 3 or 4 attempts, I was finally able to work the card out of the door. I looked down at the 2 twisted pieces of plastic in my palm. "We had a lot of happy times together." "Here," Peter said with a sigh. Let me try. He crouched down beside me and pulled a small plastic library card from his wallet. With his left hand gently pulling the doorknob, he stuck the card into the space that had signaled the demise of my visa. He worked at it silently for a few moments, and then we heard a click and he slid the door open. There! Oh, sure, after I loosened it up for you, I said as he helped me to my feet. We stepped inside the door and quietly closed it. Do we dare turn on the light? Said Peter. I don't see why not. The only two people who would know it wasn't Simon in the room are out dancing right now. I flipped the wall switch and a lamp on the small table by the window came only dimly to life. The room was a horror. There was an orange shag rug dotted with cigarette burns and stains. I didn't even want to think about it, and on the bed was a dark green spread that looked as if at one time it might have borne a pattern. A television set rested on a battered chest of drawers across from the foot of the bed. Two wooden chairs with olive green vinyl cushions were on either side of the table. Jesus! I exclaimed softly. You'd think even lying low he'd do better than this. Let's search the place and get out of here. It didn't take long. There was nothing in the chest, and not even a Bible in the nightstand. I looked in the bathroom and found an array of toiletries and a small zipper bag, but the only thing in the medicine chest was alive. So I closed the door as fast as I'd opened it. Peter looked in the closet and found 4 very nice suits hanging on the rod and a suitcase on the one shelf. He took down the suitcase and placed it on the bed. I sat beside it and gingerly pressed the latches. I half expected it to explode, but all it did was pop open. Wow, I said as I rifled through the contents. What? He has beautiful underwear. Peter rolled his eyes. You're not shopping, Alex. Hurry up. I pushed aside the shorts and socks and caught my breath when I saw the manila folder beneath them. I took it out of the suitcase and opened it. Oh my God, I said when I saw the contents. Up until that point, I had been hoping that the paranoid fantasies I developed about this guy were wrong and that Nelson had been mistaken when they couldn't identify him, but what I found in that folder took away any doubts. What is it? Peter asked anxiously. It's about Mother. It's everything about her. Her address, her likes, her dislikes, everything. Even the kind of car she drives. I took the sheet of paper from the folder and handed it to Peter. As he scanned it, he sank onto one of the chairs. I don't believe it, he said. I was getting angrier by the minute. He studied her. He studied her so that he could ingratiate himself into her life. Oh my God, I mean, I know I had my suspicions about him before, but still I didn't believe he really used her to get to Clark. It's just crazy. I know, said Peter, placing the paper on his lap. We've been involved in some weird things, but this is incredible. You wouldn't think something like this could happen. How could he have found out about her in the first place? How could he know we worked for the government? We never tell anybody, and especially Mother. She would never have told anyone. How could he know about her? We were silent for a time. Peter looked down at the list while I just steamed. So what do we do now? Peter asked. I looked him in the eye. Wait for him. You're joking, he exclaimed. You want to confront a bomber. I want to confront the bastard that's been using my mother, yes. Are you out of your mind? We need to call the police, or the FBI. Not without any proof of anything. Alex. He's staying in a strange city under an assumed name. He's gathered all this information about someone whose life he's entered. Hell, my mother's done that much. Or have you forgotten her little escapade in Los Angeles? That doesn't give us any proof he's the bomber. Keep your voice down, Peter said in an apprehensive whisper. I lowered my voice in kind. Look, that stuff may be suspicious, but we need something to tie him directly to the bombings. We didn't find any trace of explosives in this room, or anything to make a bomb with. Of course not. He wouldn't keep them here. He probably has them stashed in a locker somewhere. The only thing we know for sure is that he isn't who he says he is. And I'm going to stay here and find out who he really is. What if he has a gun? Peter asked, still trying to be the voice of reason. Where would he have it? There's no gun here, and he can't be carrying it with him. He and Mother were going dancing. Surely she'd feel it. I stopped and shuddered as I realized the implication of what I'd said. Who knows where he might have it hidden, said Peter. I don't care, I exclaimed, raising my voice again and then lowering it quickly. I don't care. Look, you can stay or go, but I'm not leaving. I'm going to confront his ass when he gets here. Even if he has a gun somewhere, we have the element of surprise on our side. He won't be expecting us here. We'll have a jump on him. And how do you expect to get any proof from him? If he's been using my mother, I'll beat the truth out of him. I switched off the light and sat in the chair opposite Peter. We had a long, boring wait in the dark, during which my resolves alternately flagged and flared up. I found myself softly singing along with the string of the Carpenters' greatest hits, which continued to blare through the wall for the next half hour or so. I was relieved when it stopped, not because I had anything against the duo, but because I was afraid we wouldn't hear Simon's approach. We intermittently engaged in whispered conversation, which usually revolved around how we were going to explain this turn of events to Mother. I'd found the girlish lilt she'd been projecting for the past week, while she dated this monster, irritating, but now that I was put in the position of stopping it, I didn't want to. In his usual practical way, Peter kept reminding me of the fact that it would be difficult, but it was something we had to do. That is, of course, if we lived past the encounter with Simon. It was after 11, and I was beginning to think that if our vigil went on much longer, I was going to have a hard time staying awake, let alone staying angry, when we heard footsteps approaching on the balcony outside. We hurriedly got up, and I stood beside the door with my back to the window. My body was tensed, but I made sure not to jostle the curtains. Peter stayed next to me. There was such a sense of unreality about what we were doing that for a moment I felt like I was outside myself, watching a movie as someone who looked exactly like me, about to do something that was dangerous in the extreme. I wanted to cry out to tell him to stop. For a split second, I was overwhelmed with the feeling that what we were doing was totally irrational. I almost hoped the footsteps would reach the room and keep going, but they stopped directly outside the door, and without a pause, a key was slipped into the lock. The door opened, and Simon's vaguely backlit form stepped through. When he reached for the light switch, I leaped at him. He gave a choked cry as I grabbed his neck, spun him around, and slammed his back against the wall, pinning him there. I was amazed at my own dexterity, but in retrospect, it wasn't exactly surprising that I could do this given the alarming regularity with which it's been done to me. I kept a grip on his neck with my right hand and held his left shoulder firmly against the wall with my left. All the while, he struggled in vain to pull my hand away from his neck. Peter swiftly closed the door and turned on the light. When Simon saw who his assailant was, he stopped struggling, and his eyes practically goggled out of his head. "Alex, what are you doing?" He managed to choke the words out of his throat. "Who are you?" I demanded. You know who I am. What are you doing in my room?" "I'll ask the questions. We know your name isn't Simon Tivoli, which I might add is the most ridiculously British alias I've ever heard. Now, who are you?" I'm just Simon." I turned to Peter. "Will you look?" He stepped forward and reached behind my prisoner's back, fished around for a moment, then pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open. "Simon Collingsworth?" he read. "God, that's not much better." I turned back to Simon. "What are you doing with my mother?" He managed to look confused and frightened. It was a very convincing act, but I had no doubt that if I eased my lock on him, Peter and I would most likely end up dead. "I'm dating her," he stammered. "Very funny," I shot back. "You know what I'm talking about." "I haven't laid a hand on her." "Laid a hand on her?" My face was so hot now that I thought I might spontaneously combust. "You're using her, you bastard." "I don't know what you're talking about." "We searched the room, Simon," said Peter. I added, "We found the dossier on my mother." "Dossier?" he said, trying to appear completely perplexed. "Likes the color blue. Likes to dance. Her favorite perfume, her favorite chocolates, the kind of car she drives. Everything." On the last word, I pulled him forward and slammed him back against the wall. "I know why you chose her. I know what you've been doing. But what I want to know is how you knew about her. How did you find out?" "Well, of course I knew about her," he croaked through his constricted throat. How? I live in London, don't I? Of course I've heard about her. That's not possible, I said loudly. How could anyone know? Well, your mother has family there, doesn't she? They know. You're lying. We've never told anyone about it. Nobody, not even family. How could they know? Simon looked at me as if I were completely insane. They're your relatives, aren't they? Of course they knew about your father dying. My father? I stopped cold. I could feel my mind turning to putty. My father dying? What does that have to do with anything? He blinked. Well, that's when she inherited all her money in it. For a moment, I had the uncanny feeling that I'd just been dropped into an alternate universe, where everything from the world as I know it was reversed. I stood holding this man's neck and staring into his eyes. He appeared to believe that what he was saying made perfect sense, and yet it sounded like the bleatings of an alien species to me. After a long pause, the light started to dawn. The money, I said slowly. You see, not long past, I was introduced to your Aunt Ida, one day your father's sister, by a mutual friend. She's a very nice woman and fair talkative. She told me all about your mother. You're after my mother's money. It's not quite as bad as all that. It's not just the money, he said, as if a bit offended. After all, she's an attractive woman and very nice to boot. I was perfectly willing to marry her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're a gigolo. What a terrible word. Makes it sound so tawdry. It's not as if your mother doesn't like me. I say, Alex, do you think you could let go of me? I'm not as young as I used to be, and I'm having a bit of a bother breathing at the moment. I looked at Peter, whose face had fallen open like a trap door. The sense of relief and the magnitude of how far off we'd been struck us both at the same time. We burst out laughing, and I released my grasp on Simon's neck. As he tried to pull himself back together, he appeared to be even more baffled by this reaction than he'd been by the attack. He tucked the tails of his shirt in, straightened his tie, and adjusted his jacket with wounded dignity. I know you must not think me much of a gentleman, he said as we laughed, but I really do think your mother is smashing. At least, I do now. I wouldn't have you think I'm entirely mercenary. Oh, that's all right, I said. Then, without preamble, I drew back my right fist and punched him in the face with the full force of a son defending his mother's tarnished honor. Never have I felt anything as soul-satisfying as when my knuckles connected with his beautiful nose. His head snapped back, hitting the wall. He slid down into a crumpled mess on the floor. Blood flowed freely from both nostrils. God, he said with a newly acquired twang. I think you've broken my nose. How fortunate that you have national health insurance, I said, standing over him. They can take care of that when you get back to England. Now, I suggest that you call my mother as soon as you can, pull yourself together, and explain to her that you've been unexpectedly called back. Then I suggest that you never ever come near my mother again, or I'll break your other nose. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.